It was one of those rare mornings when Baker Street seemed to exhale, as though even London's restless lungs had found pause. Holmes sat by the fire, dressing gown of faded purple drawn close, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. A thin wisp of smoke rose from his pipe, tracing a faint spiral in the quiet. I remember remarking how singularly peaceful the day appeared, and how improbable it seemed that any soul might disturb it. "Peace, my dear Watson," said Holmes without opening his eyes, "is merely the interval between two puzzles. You, who so often lament the noise of the city, would do well to be suspicious of silence." I smiled. "You are preparing me for another disturbance, I see." Holmes's eyes flicked open, grey and keen. "Not I. Merely observation. That hound across the way. Listen." Indeed, through the open transom came a faint sound. The distant bark of a dog, sharp, measured, then abruptly cut short. It was the kind of sound one might easily dismiss, yet Holmes tilted his head as though deciphering a cipher hidden in its rhythm. "Odd," he murmured. "Dogs do not cease mid-protest unless silenced by command or fear. Which do you suppose, Watson?" "Fear seems unlikely in Marylebone," I replied. "Perhaps its owner called it in." Holmes shook his head. No voice followed, only absence. "That, Watson, is a different species of silence." Before I could frame an answer, Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a small silver tray. Upon it lay a single telegram. The paper trembled faintly with the motion of her hand. "For you, sir," she said, setting it down. Holmes tore the envelope with a fingertip and read aloud, "Come at once if convenient. If not convenient, come all the same. Incident in Camden Town. A dog that will not bark again. Lestrade." Holmes looked up, eyes brightening. "Ah, there is our silence explained." He rose with abrupt vitality, the smoke from his pipe scattering like startled pigeons. "Watson, the morning's piece is concluded. Fetch your coat." Within minutes, we were in a hansom cab, rattling northward through streets still glazed with the dew of early trade. The rhythmic clatter of hooves mingled curiously with the phrase that had already taken root in my mind. A dog that will not bark again. Holmes sat motionless beside me, eyes half-lidded, his mind already miles beyond the carriage walls. I ventured to ask whether Lestrade's message suggested a crime of violence. "Not violence," said Holmes softly. "Contradiction, the silence of a creature known for sound. Every paradox hides a story." The cab drew up before a narrow terrace of houses in Camden Town. A small crowd lingered by the gate, murmuring. Lestrade, compact and brisk as ever, greeted us with a nod. "Good of you to come, Mr. Holmes. Curious affair. Widow named Briggs found her front door open this morning. Her dog lying dead in the parlour. Nothing stolen, no signs of—"
"Struggle? Poison?" Holmes asked. "Likely, but the window latch was broken as though from outside. Neighbours heard nothing, save that one bark just before dawn." Holmes's gaze swept the narrow garden path, the doorframe, the small brass bell pull. Then, with a single motion, he knelt by the doorstep and touched the faint smear upon the tile. "Mud?" he murmured, "but not local. See the lighter hue, chalk mixed with clay, the sort found nearer Hampstead." Lestrade frowned. "A visitor from Hampstead, then? Perhaps. Or a traveller who wished to appear local." Holmes straightened. "Come, let us see the unfortunate guardian." Inside, the air was tinged with the faint sweetness of carbolic and the acrid ghost of decay. The dog, a black spaniel, lay by the hearth, tongue lolling, eyes glazed yet oddly peaceful. Holmes bent low, his fingers hovering just above the muzzle. "No frothing," he observed. "No convulsion. Whatever substance ended this creature's life, it was both swift and deliberate." Observe, Watson. The paws show traces of damp earth, yet no mud elsewhere in the room. The animal was outside, returned willingly, then died almost instantly. Therefore the act occurred upon entry. Lestrade crossed his arms. So the poison was here? Holmes pointed to a small blue dish near the skirting board. Water, recently replaced. Yet the surface bears a thin, iridescent film. Watson, if you would. I lifted the dish cautiously. The faint odour of almonds confirmed what Holmes had already deduced. Prussic acid, I said. Just so. Holmes's tone was grave. But tell me, Lestrade, who replaces a dog's water at 3 in the morning? The inspector blinked. No one, unless the dog's owner. Or an intruder posing as one, Holmes finished. An intruder whom the dog knew well enough not to bark at. The silence that followed was almost tangible. Then from somewhere deeper in the house came a faint creak. A stair, shifting under unseen weight. Lestrade's hand went to his revolver. Holmes raised a finger for quiet. Again the sound, one slow step, then another. Holmes moved toward the hall, each footfall measured, eyes bright with concentration. The oral motif, that suspended tension between noise and absence, seemed to echo with each creaking board. At the turn of the stair, a door clicked shut above us. Holmes glanced back. Our intruder has not yet departed, Lestrade? Then by heaven? Softly, Holmes whispered. The dead dog has not given his secret willingly. Let us see if the living master will do better. He began to ascend, each step a pulse in the charged quiet of the house. Somewhere above, a latch trembled. Holmes ascended without pause, the boards sighing faintly beneath his weight. I followed, revolver, drawn more from instinct than intent. The house seemed to hold its breath, a hush between
the stairs and the unseen room above. A floorboard whispered again. Holmes stopped, one hand raised. "The latch trembled a moment ago," he murmured. "That tells us the door has not been locked. Our quarry listens rather than flees." Lestrade leaned close. "Shall I rush him, sir?" Holmes's eyes glinted. "Rushing a cornered rat often makes him bite. Let him think us still below." We waited. 3 shadows on a staircase. Somewhere outside a cart rumbled distantly, and with that sound's passing came another, the faint scrape of metal on wood. Holmes moved in an instant. The door burst inward beneath his shoulder. The room beyond was narrow, low-ceilinged, and heavy with the scent of damp wallpaper. At the far wall, half concealed by curtain, stood a man in a dark coat. His right hand held something small, a key perhaps, or a blade. Holmes's voice cut through the silence. "Drop it, my good fellow, you are observed." The man hesitated. Then the object clattered to the floor. It was neither knife nor key, but a dog whistle, silver, finely engraved. "Name?" demanded Lestrade, stepping forward. The stranger swallowed. "Henry Briggs, sir. Widow Briggs's nephew. I came—" "Uninvited," Holmes finished. "And, conveniently, at dawn." Briggs's gaze flicked to the dead spaniel's empty water dish visible through the stairwell. "You think I—" "Good Lord, no. Aunt trusted me. I heard a dog had taken ill and came straight away." Holmes stooped to pick up the whistle. A curious loyalty to bring a trainer's instrument to a deathbed. He held the metal to his ear, gave the faintest blow, and a thread of sound, too high for mortal hearing, seemed to shiver through the air. The silence that followed pressed deeper than before. Watson, that is, I felt the tiny hairs on my neck rise. The same hush that had followed the spaniel's bark now lay over the house, as though sound itself recoiled. Holmes regarded Briggs steadily. "You train animals?" I used to. Circus work before the war. But Aunt's dog never took to me." "Yet it did not bark," said Holmes softly. "When you entered this morning?" Briggs's lips trembled. "Because it knew my scent. I fed it as a pup." Lestrade snorted. "And poisoned it as a grown dog, perhaps?" "No," cried Briggs. "I swear I didn't. She wouldn't have let me in otherwise." Holmes's expression altered minutely, something keen behind the calm. "You imply your aunt was alive when you arrived?" The man's shoulders sagged. I thought she was." She sat in her chair as usual. The lamp burned low. I spoke. She gave no answer. Then I saw— "Go on," Holmes urged. "She was gone, sir. Cold as stone. The dog whined, circled her once, and drank from the dish. After that—" He broke off, covering his face. "I meant to fetch help. I heard steps, yours, and hid. Foolish, but I've been accused before where I meant no harm." Lestrade's brows knitted. "You say the woman's dead?" Holmes's voice was very low. "Then this is no longer a matter of a poisoned hound." We followed Briggs down to the parlour. There, in the armchair by the dying grate, sat a figure shrouded in shawl and stillness. Mrs. Briggs's head rested gently to one side, her eyes half open, as though surprised by her own silence. Holmes approached without a word. His fingers hovered near the wrist, then withdrew. "She has been dead since before dawn," he said, "perhaps by several hours." Lestrade muttered an oath. "And no sign of struggle, same as the dog." Holmes turned to me. "Note the cup on the table, Watson. Same scent as the water dish, or almonds again? Then she drank it herself? Or was persuaded to?" Holmes's eyes flicked toward Briggs. "You said you found her thus. Was the cup there already?" I can't be sure. The lamp was nearly out." Holmes paced once, twice. "Lestrade, you will order the body removed discreetly. For now, let no one tamper with this room. I must examine the yard before the trace fades." We stepped outside. The morning had sharpened, a wind rising that tugged faintly at the garden gate. Holmes crouched by a patch of disturbed earth near the wall. "Footprints," he said. "2 sets. One heavy, one light. Observe. The deeper tread departs toward the alley, the lighter returns to the house." I studied the impressions. "So one man left while another came back?" "Or the same man altered his weight." Holmes tapped the soil with his stick. "The heavier step bears the heel of a man carrying something, or someone." Lestrade stiffened. "You mean he carried the widow herself?" "Unlikely. The distance is too short. But he carried an object requiring both hands. Note the drag here. Narrow parallel lines." I bent closer. "Like the edge of a box." Holmes nodded. "Precisely. Something rectangular, perhaps wooden, taken away under cover of darkness. And what box might belong in a quiet house where a widow keeps a faithful dog?" Lestrade frowned. "A cash box, you think?" Holmes looked up, eyes glinting. "Or a box of letters, Inspector, the sort that silences both woman and animal." As he spoke, a faint chime trembled from within the house, the clock striking 10. Its note rang thinly through the open doorway, mingling with the ghost of that earlier whistle. Holmes's gaze drifted toward the sound, his expression unreadable. "Do you hear it, Watson? The resonance changes. The silence has begun to answer back." Holmes's words hung in the air, as tangible as the chime that lingered in their wake. "The silence has begun to answer back," he said, and in that moment it truly seemed so. Even the faint rustle of the garden leaves felt deliberate, as though the house itself were straining to speak. Lestrade stepped closer, rubbing his jaw. "You think those missing letters, or whatever's in that box, were motive for murder?" Holmes turned the stick in his fingers. Motive rarely hides in gold, Inspector. It hides in paper. He pointed to the disturbed soil again. These tracks. Observe the spacing. The lighter step returns precisely 2 minutes later, judging by the due distortion. Our intruder came back after disposing of the box. I frowned. Returned to the scene of his own crime? That's folly. Not folly, said Holmes quietly. Necessity. He came back to watch. Watch what? The silence, Watson. To be certain it held. A faint rattle interrupted us, the window pane above shifting against its loose frame. Holmes's eyes lifted sharply. That window was closed when we entered. The air pressure tells me so. Lestrade grunted. Pressure? Listen. Holmes held up a finger. The faint creak subsided, followed by the tiniest sigh of escaping wind, and then a whispering thud, soft but clear. Someone inside just shut another door. We were moving before he finished. Holmes led, silent and fluid, up the narrow stair again. The door to the room where we'd found Briggs ajar. The man stood by the hearth, hands trembling, a small frame of guilt clutched to his chest. Put that down, Holmes said evenly. Briggs froze. I found it on her writing desk, my aunt's photograph with my mother. I meant no harm. Holmes crossed to him, took the frame gently and turned it over. No harm indeed. Yet even in grief you leave fingerprints on the past. This backing is fresh cut. See the splintered edge. You removed something hidden there. The man's lips parted, but no words came. Lestrade strode forward. Out with it. What did you take? I didn't. Nothing of value. Only letters. Old family letters. Holmes examined the dust on the table. And where are they now? In my coat. I swear I meant to return them once I'd read them. Holmes studied him with grave patience. Grief makes poor company for secrets, Mr. Briggs. But if these letters contain what I suspect, your aunt's death will not rest on sentiment. He gestured. Lestrade retrieved the folded sheaf from Briggs's pocket. They were tied with faded ribbon, the topmost marked in looping hand. To be destroyed, unread. Lestrade whistled. Well, that says plenty. Holmes inclined his head. Indeed it does. Watson, what do you note about the ink? I looked closely. Brownish hue, iron gall, at least 15 years old. Precisely. Yet the paper is newer, trimmed with shears. A forgery, then. But by whom, and to what end? Briggs's eyes widened. Forgery? No, these were hers. Holmes lifted one sheet to the light. See the margin watermark, Mason and Pratt Holborn. That mill began production only last year. No, Mr. Briggs, these are not your aunt's letters. Someone planted them knowing you would find them. But why? I asked. To shift suspicion, said Holmes, or to draw it away from another. These counterfeit confidences were bait. Lestrade tapped the desk impatiently. Then who set the trap? Holmes didn't answer. He had turned toward the small mirror above the mantel. Its glass reflected the window behind him, slightly ajar now. He crossed swiftly, pushed it open, and peered down into the narrow yard. There, he murmured, footprints upon the ledge. I leaned beside him. Faint smudges marked the stone sill. Holmes pressed one with a finger and held it to the light. Soot, he said, mixed with grease, chimney residue. Whoever climbed here came not from the street, but from above. Lestrade blinked. The roof? Holmes's lips curved faintly. A neighbour's roof. There's a boarding house adjoining. See the slope? Our intruder entered by the chimney, like a sooty Father Christmas with murder in his heart. A gust stirred the curtains, carrying the ghost of that high, metallic whistle tone. Briggs flinched. Holmes's gaze followed the sound. Still it persists, he murmured. The echo of obedience. He turned to the widow's nephew. "You said you trained animals, Mr. Briggs. Could another man use your whistle, one familiar to the dog?" Briggs hesitated. "Perhaps, if he'd seen me work with it." "Who would that be?" "A tenant once, Mr. Clare, lodged here a year. Quiet gentleman, paid in advance, left suddenly after quarrelling with my aunt about money owed." Holmes's brow lifted. "A quarrel and departure. Did he ever return?" "Not that I know of, but aunt said he sent letters asking for forgiveness." "Letters again," murmured Holmes. "Lestrade, have this Mr. Clare traced. Meanwhile, Watson, note how each clue sings the same refrain. A voice silenced, a sound imitated, a trust betrayed." He pocketed the whistle and turned toward the hall. "We have reached the heart of contradiction, but not yet the pulse. Come, the chimney will tell us the rest." We followed him outside to the narrow gap between houses. Holmes tilted his head back, examining the blackened stack rising into the morning light. "There," he said, pointing, "fresh scrape along the bricks and a fragment caught in the mortar." He plucked it loose, a shred of coarse cloth. "Soot-streaked tweed, Watson, the colour of London fog. Whoever descended through that flue wore this and thought himself unseen." Lestrade pocketed the scrap. "We'll check the lodger's registers along this row." "Do so," said Holmes, "but tread softly. The man we seek listens as keenly as he hides. He has already heard too much, perhaps even now." At that, a faint clinking noise came from above, like metal striking metal. We all looked up. Something small and glinting slid down the gutter and fell at our feet. A second whistle, identical to the first. Holmes bent, lifting it delicately. The tone of his voice dropped to a whisper. "The echo answers again, Watson, and this time it calls from the roof." Holmes's fingers closed around the fallen whistle as though it were a live ember. The faint metallic chill of it seemed to carry the echo of that silent house behind us. Lestrade's voice broke the pause. "Another whistle! Then we've got our man up there still." Holmes gave a curt nod. "Most likely. A criminal who lingers to observe his own trap often reveals more than one who flees. Watson, stay close." He moved toward the alley, where the chimney stacks merged above the row of terraced roofs. Lestrade followed, muttering about Scotland Yard's lack of wings. The bricks were damp, slick with soot. Holmes tested the drainpipe with a tug and began his ascent, swift and sure as a cat. I confess I muttered a quiet prayer as I followed, my boots scraping for purchase. Halfway up, Holmes paused and spoke over his shoulder. "Note, Watson, the second whistle fell from the gutter, therefore its owner was above, not beside, our vantage. The signal was either accidental or deliberate." "To warn an accomplice?" I suggested. "Or to test whether we listen as keenly as he does," Holmes replied. "Curiosity cuts both ways." We reached the roof. The grey expanse stretched before us, chimneys like sentinels, their mouths blackened and mute. Holmes crouched low, scanning the neighbouring ridges. The faint wind whistled through a vent pipe, a continuation of our motif, so persistent now it seemed almost sentient. "There," he whispered, "footmarks across the soot. See how the right shoe leaves a deeper impression. Our intruder favours that leg. And observe the pattern, half circles near the toes, cobbler's patch on the sole." We followed the prints along the ridge to a trap door leading down into the adjoining boarding house. Holmes tested the latch. It yielded slightly under his touch. "Recently used," he murmured. "Still warm from friction." Lestrade's hand went to his revolver. "We'll take him now." Holmes shook his head. "No, if he is still below, he expects pursuit. Far wiser to let him think us cautious." He opened the trap door a fraction. A rush of stale air drifted up, a mingling of smoke, tallow, and something faintly medicinal. Holmes's nostrils flared. "Carbolic soap," he said. "Our friend is cleaning, either his conscience or his disguise." We descended quietly into a narrow attic corridor lit by a single lamp. Voices murmured below. Holmes motioned me toward the stairwell. The boards creaked faintly underfoot, another echo in that chain of sound. From behind a half-open door came the rhythmic swish of cloth in water. Holmes gestured to Lestrade, quickly now, but gently. He pushed the door wide. Inside stood a thin man in shirt-sleeves, sleeves rolled high, scrubbing a jacket in a wash-basin. His face was pale, his hair soot-streaked, and beside him on the table lay a folded scrap of coarse tweed, the very colour of the fragment Holmes had found in the chimney. The man spun round, startled, water dripping from his hands. "What's the meaning of this?" "Good morning, Mr. Clare," said Holmes, his tone almost affable. "I see you are cleansing more than your attire." The man froze. How do you know me?" "By your choice of scentless soap, the soot under your nails, and this article." Holmes lifted the matching whistle from his pocket, "which I believe fell from your roof." Clare's eyes widened. "You found it, then you know—" "That you returned to the widow's house last night," Holmes said evenly, "and that you brought with you the silence you once taught her dog to heed." Lestrade stepped forward. "Enough play-acting. You poisoned them both, didn't you? Her, to keep her quiet, and the beast, because it would have raised the alarm." Clare's voice broke. "Quiet? She was never quiet. She threatened to ruin me. Send the letters to the magistrate." "Letters?" Holmes's tone sharpened. "Then the forged ones were yours." The man's expression twisted between fury and despair. "I wrote them, yes, but only to frighten her. She kept my real letters, proof I'd taken her money years ago. I begged her to forgive me. When she refused, I meant only to recover them, nothing more." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Yet she died." Clare sank onto the chair, the strength leaving him. "I didn't mean it. She startled when I entered. I told her to be still. She reached for the bell. The dog barked. His hands trembled. "I blew the whistle. It remembered. It stopped. And she drank from the cup before I could stop her." Lestrade's mouth tightened. "And the poison?" "She'd been dosing herself with tonics for her heart. I swear I didn't know she'd mixed them wrong. When she fell, I panicked. I thought, if they found me there, they'd hang me. I climbed the flue, took the letters. I meant to destroy them." Holmes regarded him with a grave stillness that was somehow heavier than anger. "Your panic killed twice over. A creature that trusted you and a woman who perhaps might have forgiven you." The man's face crumpled. "Then let them hang me." Lestrade cuffed him briskly. "You'll have your chance to confess before a magistrate, Mr. Clare. Scotland Yard thanks you for making it tidy." As the inspector led him out, Holmes remained by the basin, staring at the dark water. "Observe, Watson," he said quietly. "He cleans what can be washed away and leaves untouched what cannot, the stain within." I said nothing. The wind outside pressed faintly against the shutters, its low note merging with the memory of the dog's bark that had begun this strange affair. Holmes turned the whistle once between his fingers, then set it down beside the basin. "The paradox resolves," he murmured. "The dog that barked once, then never again. Its silence was obedience, not ignorance. It answered its master, even unto death." He looked toward the narrow window where daylight crept across the floor. "But mark you, Watson, the echo lingers still." At that instant, from below stairs, came a faint, metallic trill. The second whistle, struck accidentally perhaps by Lestrade's careless hand, or by some echo of intention. Holmes's gaze lifted. "Do you hear it?" he said softly. "The case has ended, yet the sound remains." Holmes stood motionless, listening to that faint, metallic trill fade into stillness. When it ended, the silence seemed heavier than before, like air that had remembered sorrow. Lestrade's boots thudded on the stairs below as he led the prisoner out. I said quietly, "It's finished then." The poor creature and her master, both victims of his folly. Holmes's brows knit. "You think so, Watson?" His confession seemed genuine. "Indeed it did. That is precisely what troubles me." I stared. "Surely you don't doubt—" Holmes turned toward the wash basin. "He confessed to poisoning neither woman nor dog. Observe the contradiction. A thief, a forger, a coward, but not a murderer. Yet both victims died of prussic acid, a substance no man keeps by chance. Where, then, is his source?" I frowned. "The widow's medicine," he said. "Convenient," Holmes replied. "But tell me, when you examined that cup, did you note the rim?" "Yes, ordinary china, no chips." "Precisely, and yet her lips were unmarked. Cyanide burns flesh instantly, even in small doses. There was no stain upon her skin, therefore the poison entered by other means." I felt a chill. "The water dish?" Holmes shook his head. "That killed the dog, not the mistress. 2 deaths, 2 methods, 1 pattern. Obedience. The animal obeyed a signal and drank. What if the woman did the same? Drank at another's command." Before I could answer, Lestrade reappeared at the door. "He's in custody. The yard will tidy it up before supper." Holmes regarded him coolly. "Tidy? Yes, but wrong." Lestrade blinked. "Wrong?" He as much as admitted it. "A man may confess to theft to avoid being hanged for murder. The question is not what he said, but what he omitted." Holmes gestured toward the window. "Did you search the roof?" "Of course, nothing but soot and wind." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And a signaler's perch, Inspector. The second whistle fell after Claire's capture. Who then threw it?" Lestrade's mouth opened, then closed. "You think there's another?" "I know it. The echo persists because the source has not ceased. Watson, fetch my magnifier." I handed it to him. Holmes crossed to the chimney flue, his eyes narrowing as he studied the mortar. "See here, scrape marks upon the interior brick, vertical and recent. Someone descended after Claire escaped." "Impossible," said Lestrade. "We were in the yard." "Yet it occurred," Holmes replied calmly. Our eyes were on the prisoner, not the house. While we congratulated ourselves, another climbed free. "Then Claire has an accomplice." Holmes nodded. "And one far cleverer than he, a mind that composes silence like a musician arranges notes. Come, we must act before the final movement." Within minutes we were back on the roof, wind cutting across the tiles. Holmes crouched by the trapdoor, examining the latch with his glass. As I suspected, resin on the catch. Someone sealed it earlier and broke it from within. Lestrade leaned over. "So they were hiding here all along." Holmes straightened. "Precisely. Claire returned for the letters, but another returned for the silence." I shivered. "Holmes, do you mean—" He turned sharply. "The widow Briggs did not die by accident. She drank at a signal she trusted. That signal came not from a whistle, but from a voice." At that instant, from the street below, a woman's cry rose, sharp, terrified. Then another sound followed, the unmistakable high, thin tone of the whistle. Holmes's head snapped up. "There, Watson! The echo answers once more." We scrambled to the edge. Below, Lestrade's constable had halted a veiled figure attempting to cross the yard. Her gloved hand held the twin whistle to her lips. Holmes descended the drainpipe with astonishing speed. I followed as best I could, my heart thundering. By the time we reached the ground, the constable had seized her arm. The veil tore aside, revealing a narrow, clever face, pale eyes, mouth thin as a blade. Holmes regarded her gravely. Mrs. Briggs's companion, I presume. The housekeeper. She stared back, unblinking. "You have no right." "I have deduction," Holmes interrupted. And that grants every right reason allows. You were the widow's confidant, her nurse, and her heir under a recently altered will. You introduced the tonic that killed her. That's a lie. Then explain the prussic acid in your apron seam, Holmes said quietly. And this? He lifted the whistle from her trembling fingers. You silenced the dog after she died, to mimic the sequence of the earlier quarrel, thereby casting suspicion upon Claire. Her defiance faltered. He ruined her. He would have taken everything. She pitied him still, foolish woman. I wanted peace. I wanted quiet. Holmes's tone softened, almost pitying. And so you orchestrated it. 2 deaths bound by silence, each believing obedience meant safety. Lestrade stepped forward. That's enough confession for one day. The woman's lips curved in a bitter smile. You'll find no proof now. The letters, the bottles, all burned. Holmes's eyes darkened. Not all. You forgot the echo. He turned the whistle in his hand. The residue of acid upon the rim
matches that upon the cup. You tested it to be certain the dog would die quickly. Even now it sings against your guilt. The woman's composure shattered. I didn't mean for her to drink it, only to frighten her, make her faint, not die. Lestrade's men took her then, her protests dwindling into the same weary silence that had haunted the house. Holmes watched as they led her away. You see, Watson, he said at last, it was never the dog that puzzled me, nor the man. It was the pause between the two, an interval too deliberate for chance. Murder, in this case, was composed like a melody. Theme, variation, reprise. I glanced at the whistle gleaming in his hand. And the final note? He smiled faintly. Still waiting to be heard? As if summoned, a distant church bell began to toll, its tone deep and resonant, rolling through the narrow street. Holmes pocketed the whistle, his face unreadable. Listen closely, my dear Watson, he murmured. Even silence has a rhythm. Holmes's words, even silence has a rhythm, seemed to echo long after the church bell had faded. He stood motionless, head slightly inclined, as if listening for an undertone that only he could perceive. The constables had led the housekeeper away, and Lestrade, notebook in hand, was busy congratulating himself on the neat closure of the affair. But Holmes's eyes were still fixed upon the shuttered windows of the Briggs house. Closure, he murmured, is a word for men who mistake quiet for conclusion. The music, Watson, has not yet resolved. I felt the old mixture of exasperation and admiration stir within me. Surely the evidence is complete? She confessed. The motive is clear, and the poison is wrong, he interrupted softly. Prussic acid leaves a signature as distinct as a fingerprint. Its odor, its speed, its corrosion, none align precisely with the widow's death. The dog, yes. The woman, no. Lestrade turned sharply. What are you suggesting now, Mr. Holmes? The woman died of kindness? Of deceit, said Holmes, but perhaps not hers. He glanced upward at the paling sky. The dog barked once, obeyed, and fell silent. The widow obeyed too, but not the same command. I am beginning to suspect a third hand in this duet. Lestrade scoffed. Another one? You'll have me arresting half of Camden before luncheon. Holmes ignored the remark and began pacing along the flagstones, his boots striking in measured rhythm. 3 steps, pause, 3 steps again. The sound itself like the heartbeat of thought. Watson, he said at last, do you recall the line of mud across the doorstep? Perfectly. Chalk mixed with clay from Hampstead, you said. And yet no such clay appears upon the shoes of either suspect. The nephew's boots were clean when we met him, and the housekeeper wore indoor slippers. Someone else left that trace, someone who walked in unseen.
Confident of their welcome. Lestrade frowned. A visitor before dawn. There's not a soul in this street who'd call on a widow at such an hour. Holmes's eyes gleamed, unless she expected him. A distant rumble of carriage wheels rolled through the morning. Holmes stopped abruptly. Lestrade, order your men to search the garden for discarded glass. A bottle, small, perhaps wrapped in paper. What for? The remainder of the true poison. He turned to me with that sudden energy that always heralded discovery. Watson, we are returning to the drawing room. Bring your medical bag. Within minutes we stood once more beside the armchair where Mrs. Briggs had met her end. Holmes motioned for me to kneel beside him. Now, my dear fellow, humour me. Examine the fingertips. I did so, peering through my lens. No stains, no rigidity beyond what's natural at this stage. And beneath the nails? A faint yellowish residue, powdered perhaps. I'd call it digitalis, though I'd need reagents to be sure. Holmes's satisfaction was instant. Digitalis, just as I thought. The dose of cyanide was staged to mimic what she took nightly. Only the dog was killed by acid, and the woman was poisoned days before she died. Slow, subtle, administered by someone with medical knowledge. I felt a jolt. Then the housekeeper could not have managed it alone. But consider, who certifies such doses? Who prepares the mixtures? Who visits under guise of care? Lestrade stared blankly. Her physician. Her apothecary, Holmes corrected. Or rather, the man posing as one. He reached into his pocket and drew out the pair of whistles, setting them upon the mantel. The clue lay here all along. 2 instruments, identical save for tone. The second, he struck it lightly, emits a fractionally lower pitch, tuned to mask the hiss of compressed air. The kind used in chemists' tincture sprayers. I noticed it only now because the echo has changed. One whistle commands a dog, the other delivers death. Lestrade's pen halted mid-word. You're telling me the killer used this thing as what? An injector? Precisely. A mechanism of deceit hidden in plain sight. The sound masked the delivery of vapour into the widow's cup, digitalis mixed with ether to disguise scent. I stared in disbelief. Then the housekeeper merely enacted another's design. Holmes nodded gravely. She believed herself avenging injustice. In truth, she was its final accomplice. Lestrade ran a hand through his hair. But who's left then? The nephew's locked up, the housekeeper's confessed, and Claire's in chains. Holmes's eyes moved to the window. None of them profited, but there is one who did. He crossed the room to a sideboard stacked with letters, invoices, and a small, gilt-edged calling card. He handed it to me. Mr. W. F. Latham, dispensing chemist, Hampstead.
Road. The mud, Holmes said softly. From his doorstep to hers. He supplied her medicine, advised her dosage, and inherited her savings as executor of the will she altered last month. I could not help an exclamation. Then he poisoned her at leisure and manipulated the others to ensure confusion. Holmes picked up the second whistle again, holding it near his ear as if to hear its memory. Notice the engraving, Latham & Co. Even his vanity betrayed him. Lestrade swore under his breath. I'll have him before nightfall. See that you do, said Holmes, though his tone had grown distant. He looked around the dim parlour, the wilted flowers, the empty hearth, the still shape in the chair. Poor woman, surrounded by those who claimed to love her, yet each sought only silence, one from guilt, one from envy, one from greed. He turned back to me. Watson, note how the melody completes itself. Command, obedience, stillness. Each step answering the last, as inevitable as a metronome. A draught stirred through the house. Somewhere deep within, a door shifted and settled with a hollow thud. The sound rolled through the rooms, an echo of all that had transpired. Holmes's eyes followed it. That, my dear friend, is the last note. The rhythm ends where it began, in the silence of an empty house. Before either of us could speak, the front bell gave a single, abrupt clang. A visitor, arriving at the precise instant Holmes's deduction reached its coda. The bell's sharp clang still reverberated when Holmes turned his head, his expression unreadable. "Right on cue," he murmured. "Watson, remain by the door. Lestrade, take position behind the curtain. We shall allow our guest to play his part before the orchestra stops." A moment later, Mrs. Hudson's anxious voice floated up the hall. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes. Says it concerns the matter in Camden Town." Holmes called evenly, "Show him in." The man who entered was spare, quick-eyed, with a neat moustache and the confident bearing of a professional accustomed to deference. His gloves were immaculate, his cuffs, faintly dusted with white powder, betrayed his trade. He inclined his head politely. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I presume. W.F. Latham, chemist. Inspector Lestrade requested that I attend to identify certain reagents. I came directly." Holmes gestured to the chair opposite the fire. "Indeed, Mr. Latham, your promptness does you credit. The inspector will be most gratified." Lestrade stepped forward then, affecting surprise. Yes, thank you for coming. We've a queer business here. Perhaps you can help us untangle it." Holmes's tone was deceptively mild. "A matter of certain medicines supplied to the late Mrs. Briggs. You were her apothecary, were you not?" "I was," said Latham. "A most respectable lady. Her heart was weak. I compounded a restorative, digitalis and ether, in mild
Proportion. And did you also prescribe prussic acid? Holmes asked, watching him closely. The chemist smiled faintly. Certainly not. A deadly compound, Mr. Holmes. Only a fool would risk it without license. Quite, murmured Holmes. And yet your shop's ledger records a purchase last week. 2 drachms, signed by a Miss Eliza Gant, the very housekeeper of the deceased. Latham stiffened. I cannot supervise every bottle once it leaves my counter. If she misused it, the blame lies with her. Holmes's voice sharpened a fraction. But she could not have obtained it without your written order. The signature is yours, though you will, of course, claim forgery. I do, Latham said quickly. Plainly a forgery, you can see that. Holmes handed him the whistle instead. Then perhaps you will also call this a forgery of your hand. The man blinked, then took the object mechanically. His thumb brushed the engraved name, Latham & Co., and a flicker of recognition crossed his face before he masked it. Common make, he said. Any supplier might stamp a name thus. Holmes leaned forward slightly, eyes gleaming. Untrue. This pattern of serif, this spacing between ampersand and C, unique to your die press. I found traces of the same metallic compound upon Mrs. Briggs's cup. Shall I continue, or would you prefer to save us both the recital? Latham's hand trembled. You have no proof. No. Holmes's voice dropped to a near whisper. Then permit me to supply it. He crossed to the mantel and struck the whistle against the edge of the fire iron. A faint, high note sounded, thin, wavering, metallic. Latham flinched as though struck. You see, Watson, said Holmes, still in that cool, instructive tone I had come to know. The guilty mind reacts not to accusation but to echo. He hears his own crime repeated and believes it alive. The chemist rose abruptly. I'll not stay here to be insulted. Lestrade stepped forward, blocking his path. Sit down, Mr. Latham. Holmes regarded him gravely. One moment more, Inspector. Let the man's own tongue complete the melody. Latham's composure began to fracture. "You can't prove I killed her. I only gave her what she asked for. She wanted sleep, peace. She begged me, said her heart would fail soon enough." "And so you hastened it," Holmes said quietly. "You who had once courted her niece and been refused, who stood next in her confidence and in her will, the perfect executor indeed, executing both estate and owner in one stroke." The man's jaw clenched. "She tormented me with those letters. I warned her to destroy them. She laughed, said she would send them to my wife. Do you understand? My wife." Holmes's voice softened almost to pity. "So, you brewed her comfort. Digitalis for her heart, ether for disguise, and silence for reward." Latham sank back into the chair, the defiance draining from him. "It was an accident," he muttered. "The dose too strong. I meant only to quiet her, to stop the endless talk." Holmes inclined his head. "And the dog?" "The animal barked when I poured the water. I panicked. If the beast alarmed the neighbours, all was lost. I added the acid, quick, merciful." Lestrade exhaled through his teeth. "Merciful, is it? You'll have mercy enough at the Old Bailey." Holmes said nothing further. He stood by the hearth, gazing into the embers, the faint light catching the silver of the whistle in his hand. The sound motif lingered between us, the ghost of that high note still ringing in memory. At last he spoke. "You see, Watson, each villain imagines himself composer of his own symphony, but crime is tone-deaf. It ends always in discord." Latham, pale and spent, stared into the fire as though hoping it might erase him. Lestrade clapped the irons upon his wrists. "You'll answer for it in the morning." When the door closed behind them, the house fell still. Only the ticking of the clock marked the passage of time, steady and indifferent. Holmes placed the whistle on the mantel beside its twin. "That," he said quietly, "is the true rhythm of silence, the world resuming its ordinary beat after the false note has been struck." He turned toward me, weary but luminous in that strange inward way of his. "There will be no encore, Watson, yet I confess I shall miss the music." I was about to speak when a faint tap came from the window pane, sharp, deliberate, unmistakable. Holmes's eyes flicked upward, a glint returning. "Or perhaps," he murmured, "the orchestra has one note left to play." Holmes moved to the window in a single stride, his shadow cutting across the lamplight. The faint tap came again, measured, metallic, deliberate. He drew back the curtain, and the cool night pressed against the glass like a breath withheld. "Watson," he said softly, "the performance is not yet concluded." Outside, in the dim yard, a figure stood half in darkness, half in lamplight, a constable's silhouette, yet the uniform hung wrong on his frame. One gloved hand held something that caught the light. Holmes opened the sash with a swift, silent motion. "Good evening," he called. "You have chosen an unusual hour for your report." The figure looked up. "Message from the yard, sir," came the answer, a voice muffled, oddly strained. "Inspector Lestrade's orders. I'm to collect the evidence." Holmes's tone was pleasant, but precise. "Indeed? And which evidence would that be?" "The whistles, sir," the man said, stepping nearer. "Inspector's instruction. He wishes them conveyed to the chemical examiner tonight." I saw Holmes's eyes narrow a fraction. A curious urgency. "Tell me, my man, when did the inspector give you this errand?" "Half an hour ago, sir, outside Camden Station." Holmes smiled thinly. "Impossible. The inspector left here not 10 minutes past, bound for Scotland Yard, where he remains at this moment." The man froze, the mask slipping from his voice. "Then I must have misunderstood." Holmes's hand flashed out. "Watson, the latch!" I sprang forward as the impostor made for the gate. The metallic object fell from his grasp, striking the stones with that unmistakable high note. The whistle again, sharper now, like a blade drawn in haste. The sound sliced through the night, echoing against the walls. Holmes vaulted the sill and was after him, his long strides cutting across the cobblestones. I followed, heart pounding, the rhythm of pursuit matching that terrible ringing tone. The man darted into the narrow alley beyond the Briggs house, his false tunic flapping as he ran. Holmes's voice rang ahead of me, cool and commanding. "Stop, sir! You cannot outrun consequence." A single shot cracked the air. The man stumbled, clutched his arm, but kept running. Holmes closed the distance in a flash, striking the pistol from his hand and sending both sprawling into the shadows. I reached them moments later, revolver raised. Holmes had already pinned the fugitive's wrist, wrenching the weapon free. Beneath the false uniform, the man's face glimmered pale and desperate. "Latham's assistant," Holmes said quietly. "The apprentice chemist, James Hollis. I feared as much." The youth glared up at him. "You'll get nothing from me." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, "you have already given everything." He held up the fallen whistle, still trembling faintly from its strike against the stones. "A twin to the others, but newly polished. Your own work, no doubt. You came to retrieve them before the Yard could analyze the residue." Hollis spat a curse. "He told me to destroy them, to burn the lot. Said they'd hang us both." Holmes's voice hardened. "And when you learned he had been arrested, you thought to save yourself by erasing the evidence, but your hand was guided by fear, not reason." The young man struggled, his breath ragged. "I didn't poison her. He made me mix the compounds, said it was a harmless sedative. I swear I didn't know." Holmes regarded him with that searching calm that could flay a man's conscience bare. Ignorance may spare the gallows, but it cannot silence guilt. You helped fashion death, and you came back to reclaim its instrument. He released his grip slowly. "Watson, see to his wound." The bullet had grazed Hollis's arm, painful but not mortal. As I bound it, the boy's composure crumbled. "I wanted to run," he whispered. "I heard him scream when you took him. I thought, if I could just get the whistles, maybe I could make it right." Holmes's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Then let truth be your only remedy now. Tell me, was there ever a third whistle?" The youth hesitated. "There was a prototype. Different chamber. He said it could control the flow better. I left it in the shop, under the bench." Holmes rose. "Then there lies the true conclusion." He turned toward the house, the light from its doorway casting his figure into sharp relief. "Lestrade must have that prototype before dawn, otherwise the law will convict only a shadow and let the architect slip through his bars of reason." I helped the wounded man to his feet. As we approached the gate, the echo of our steps seemed to align with the steady ticking from within the house. The sound motif returning, deliberate and grave, as though time itself acknowledged the cadence Holmes had pursued, from the first bark to this final silence. Holmes paused on the threshold. "Every crime, Watson, leaves its echo. Most men flee from it. A few, like our chemist here, attempt to drown it beneath another. But it always returns, softened, perhaps, yet unmistakable." He looked back into the darkened yard where the whistle lay glinting faintly. "Pick it up, my dear fellow," he said quietly. "Let it sound once more, for truth's sake." I bent, lifted the instrument, and gave the faintest breath. The note rose thin and trembling, no longer menacing but mournful. It lingered, then faded into the distance, taken by the wind that whispered through the silent street. Holmes listened, head slightly bowed. "There," he murmured. "The last echo. The house may sleep now." From somewhere far off came the soft rumble of a carriage, perhaps Lestrade's returning from the yard, or merely London resuming its endless motion. Yet in that moment it felt to me like the world exhaling at last, the rhythm of silence resolving into peace. Holmes was at the window before I had crossed the threshold, the flicker of gaslight glinting along his cheekbone as he peered into the night. The sound that had startled us, a faint tap, lighter than rain, came again. This time there was no figure outside, no movement in the yard, only the whisper of wind stirring the ivy along the wall. "Curious," he murmured. "Our orchestra refuses to end its score." He reached through the open sash, his fingers deft and certain, and drew in a small folded paper that had been wedged against the sill. A sliver of sealing wax gleamed along its edge. Holmes turned it over once in the lamplight. "Watson, our phantom conductor has left a coda." I watched as he broke the seal. Inside lay a single line, written in a fine, deliberate hand. "There is no silence for those who listen too closely." Holmes read it twice, his eyes narrowing. "The hand is familiar, but not the ink." I stepped nearer. "You think it from Latham?" He shook his head. No, his penmanship leaned rightward, his pressure uneven, vanity disguised as precision. "This is a calmer hand, leftward slant, consistent margin. A woman's script, trained and sure. Yet our female suspects are in custody." A slow breath escaped him. "Unless one has never been counted among them." Before I could speak, he turned sharply toward the hearth, where the two whistles lay side by side. The faint light gleamed upon them like twin coins. Holmes's hand hovered over one, then stopped. "Watson," he said, "note the dust upon this mantelpiece. One outline is fainter than the other. Someone touched this whistle after we returned from the yard." I stared. "But who could—" Who indeed? Holmes crossed the room, examined the lock, the skirting, even the ashes beneath the grate. "Observe, the coal has been disturbed. Someone crouched here not an hour past. She waited until we were outside." "She?" Holmes nodded slowly. "The accomplice who taught Latham silence." He knelt by the fireplace, sweeping aside a thin layer of ash. There, half buried, lay a narrow metal tube, capped at both ends and bound with string. He lifted it delicately, eyes shining. "The prototype, Watson, the third whistle." I exhaled. "Then Hollis spoke truth?" "Truth," Holmes repeated softly, "but not the whole symphony." He unscrewed one end of the tube. A faint hiss escaped, like a breath too long held. Inside lay a small rolled sheet. Another note, its folds crisp, the ink scarcely dry. Holmes read aloud. "A craftsman's apprentice learns his master's design, but the hand that sketches it first belongs to neither. Let him answer, and he will find me where the echoes end." Lestrade, who had entered unnoticed, gave a low whistle of his own. "Devil take it, Holmes, is there another one?" Holmes looked up. "Not another criminal, Inspector, the first one. The mind that taught Latham every trick of the trade, the maker of these whistles, the author of their sound." "You mean his supplier?" "His mentor," said Holmes. "A certain Mr. Willoughby, retired metallurgist, lately resident near the river wharves. Latham apprenticed under him 12 years ago. I suspected his touch the moment I saw the engraving on that whistle." Lestrade muttered, "We'll have him fetched before dawn." Holmes's expression remained grave. "You may try, but I fear we chase an echo. The letter promises as much." He turned to me. "Watson, note the wax, black, not red. Industrial sealant, the kind used in laboratories. The scent of ether lingers faintly still." And this Willoughby, he's the one who began it all? Holmes's voice dropped. He built the instruments, designed their cavities to resonate at differing frequencies. He discovered that a precisely tuned note could conceal the hiss of gas or spray. Latham used it for poison, but the inventor, he used it for art. To him the world was an instrument to be played. Lestrade gave a short laugh. A madman, then. A visionary corrupted by his pupil, Holmes corrected softly. He wished to craft a perfect silence, a tone that, when sounded, would drown all others. Latham's experiments merely imitated the form. He studied the paper again. Where the echoes end, that can mean only one place. The river? I ventured. Holmes smiled faintly. The foundry by the Thames. It was there the whistles were forged, and there the master will wait to reclaim his final note. He slipped the paper into his pocket and reached for his coat. Lestrade, assemble your men discreetly. We go to the river. The inspector grumbled but obeyed, dispatching a constable at once. Holmes turned to me, his eyes alive again with that peculiar light I had seen in so many of his pursuits, the brightness of a mind confronting its equal. "Watson," he said, "this affair began with a sound that ceased too suddenly. It will end with one that refuses to die." I took my revolver and followed him out into the night. The air had turned colder. The cobblestones gleamed faintly with mist. Behind us, the Briggs house stood silent at last, the faint rhythm of the clock marking its release. Ahead, from far across the city, came the low toll of another bell, slow, resonant, and broken. Holmes stopped beneath a gas lamp, its flame wavering in the wind. "Do you hear that, Watson?" "Yes." "The bell?" He shook his head. "No, the tone beneath it, that hum, the world itself preparing for the final chord." As he spoke, a thin vibration stirred in the air, neither wind nor metal, but something in between, a sound so faint it seemed imagined, and yet perfectly in tune with the echo that had haunted us since Baker Street. Holmes's face turned toward the east. "The river calls," he said, simply. "Let us answer." Holmes led the way through the sleeping streets, his coat drawn tight, his stride long and certain. The mist had thickened into a fine, trembling veil that caught the lamplight and turned it ghost-like. Each of our footsteps rang dull against the stones, merging with the distant toll of the bell that still seemed to reverberate somewhere beyond hearing. "The river," Holmes said, his voice low but alive with thought, "is London's memory, Watson. Everything we cast into it, guilt, invention, or body, returns eventually in some altered form. Tonight we retrieve a mind that sought to silence even that current. We turned into a narrow lane where the cobbles glistened black with damp. Ahead, the outline of a factory chimney cut sharply against the grey sky. A single window burned faintly near the roof, a dim orange square like an ember refusing to die. Lestrade's men followed at a distance, muffled shapes in the fog. "He'll not slip us this time," the inspector whispered. "Do not count him caught until he stops listening," Holmes murmured. "Our adversary has built his world of sound. He will hear us long before we hear him." A low hum met our ears then, steady, almost imperceptible. It was not the wind nor machinery, but something finer, the faint metallic vibration of tuned metal. Holmes raised his hand. "There, Watson, the note beneath silence. He is awake." We reached the foundry door. It stood ajar, a wedge of yellow light spilling across the fog. Inside, the air shimmered with heat, and the scent of oil and iron. Rows of moulds lay like sleeping giants, and from somewhere beyond them came the rhythmic clang of a hammer, slow, deliberate, echoing the beat that had haunted us since the first bark in Marylebone. Holmes stepped forward. "Mr. Willoughby," he called, his voice calm, almost cordial. "We have come to return your instruments." The hammer paused. Out of the shadows emerged a tall man in a soot-darkened apron, his beard streaked with grey, his eyes clear and cold. "So," he said softly, "the pupil sends his collectors." "Not collectors," said Holmes, "observers. You have composed a rather dangerous sonata, sir." Willoughby's gaze flicked toward the whistle in Holmes's hand. "You do not understand it. The world drowns in noise. I sought harmony, a single perfect pitch to quiet the chaos." Holmes's tone was grave. "And in seeking silence you created death." The man's smile was faint. "Death is merely the absence of motion. I sought the absence of dissonance." He gestured to a workbench beside the furnace. Upon it lay several incomplete whistles, each finer, smaller, more intricate than the last. Their silver surfaces caught the firelight like shards of moon. Holmes examined them from a distance. "You built these for Latham." "For the idea," Willoughby corrected. "He paid for the brass and the labour, but not the knowledge. I taught him resonance, the way air can carry intention. He lacked discipline. He turned art to commerce, harmony to crime." Holmes stepped closer, his voice a quiet counterpoint. "And yet you continued his work. You knew what he had done." "I perfected it," said Willoughby, a tone so precise it could still the heart, soothe the mind, cleanse the world of its clamour. Lestrade broke in impatiently. "You mean murder?" The old man's eyes blazed. "Murder is chaos. I bring peace." Holmes's voice cut through the heat and hammer and madness. "You bring oblivion, and you will bring no more." He lifted the whistle slightly. "This, I believe, is your final model. Hollis called it the prototype. But I see now it was a test, not a tool. The note within, what frequency did you choose, sir?" Willoughby's smile returned, weary, almost tender. "Would you like to hear it, Mr. Holmes?" "Not I," said Holmes, "but perhaps the court." The man moved swiftly then, too swiftly for his age. He seized one of the smaller whistles from the bench and pressed it to his lips. Holmes sprang forward, but the sound came first, a high, trembling vibration, thin as light, yet heavy as dread. My vision blurred. A nausea rippled through me. Lestrade clutched at the wall. The furnace flames flickered wildly, guttering as though choked. Holmes reached the man,
striking the whistle from his hand. The tone died at once, leaving a ringing void in its place. Willoughby staggered back, his breath uneven, a strange serenity upon his face. "You hear it now?" he whispered. The perfect silence. Holmes caught his arm as he swayed. "You've poisoned the air itself. What was in it?" The man's lips moved faintly. "Ether. Vaporized. Resonant carrier." His knees gave way. Holmes eased him to the ground, his pulse fading beneath my fingertips. "He's dying," I said. Holmes's reply was almost a whisper. "He has tuned his own body to stillness." Willoughby's final breath left him in a sigh that was not quite a sound, yet it trembled through the foundry like a closing note. The metal moulds quivered once, then settled. The rhythm ceased. Lestrade staggered to his feet. "Good Lord, what devil's work is this?" Holmes rose slowly, eyes fixed on the dead man's face. "Not devilry, Inspector, only genius turned inward. He sought silence and found it absolute." He walked to the bench, picking up the remaining whistle. "This one, at least, must never sing." With a single, sharp motion, he flung it into the furnace. The metal hissed, twisted and melted into the orange glow. The sound motif that had pursued us, the faint hum beneath all things, seemed at last to shudder, then dissolve. The air grew still. Even the river outside had gone quiet, as if London itself had paused to listen. Holmes turned toward me, his face drawn but luminous in the flickering light. "There, Watson," he said softly, "is your final deduction that silence itself may kill when pursued too perfectly." I said nothing. The only reply was the faint settling crack of the cooling iron, a single, deliberate sound, like the heartbeat of a city beginning again. Then from the far end of the foundry, something fell with a metallic ring. Holmes's head turned sharply. "Listen, do you hear it?" Holmes was already moving toward the far end of the foundry before the echo had died. The metallic ring seemed to roll through the air like a ripple on water, subtle, haunting, impossibly deliberate. Lestrade called after him, "Probably just a loose bolt, sir." Holmes did not answer. He held one finger to his lips, motioning for silence. The faint sound came again, ting, ting, measured, almost rhythmic, as though struck by an unseen hand. He bent to retrieve a long iron rod lying near the furnace, then used it to lift a fallen sheet of metal. Beneath it, half hidden in soot and shadow, lay a small brass cylinder, its surface engraved with the same Latham & Co. lettering that had haunted this case. "Another whistle?" I asked. Holmes examined it closely. "No, Watson, the source of them. This is the mould from which the others were cast. Observe the internal cavity, precisely tuned, still resonant. The sound we heard was the dying echo of molten air trapped within." Lestrade squinted. "A mould making noise? Never heard of such a thing." Holmes gave a faint smile. "Few men have. Sound inspector is memory given vibration. Even metal remembers." He turned the mould in his hand, its surface still warm from the furnace. A faint hum rose, steady, uncanny. "There," he murmured. "The same frequency that haunted us from the beginning. The foundry itself has taken up his note." For a long moment we listened. The hum wavered, deepened, then faded into the surrounding air. Lestrade broke the silence. "So that's it then? Case closed, murderer dead, the rest bound for trial?" Holmes regarded him gravely. "Closed perhaps, but not concluded. We have ended the act, not the theme. This note will not rest until its resonance is spent." I frowned. "You speak as though it were alive." He met my gaze. "In a sense it is. Every crime leaves its frequency, Watson. You of all men should hear it. Your pen records them, your heart interprets them." Lestrade muttered, "Well, I'll leave the music to you, gentlemen. My duty's to the paperwork." He gestured to his constables. "Fetch a cart for the body. We'll seal this place off till morning." Holmes watched them depart, the weight of the moment seeming to press upon him. When the door shut behind the last man, he turned to me quietly. "Do you recall, Watson, how the affair began?" "With a dog that barked once and then was silent?" He nodded. "Precisely. A creature trained to obey a tone it trusted. Tonight, humanity has done the same." His gaze moved to the cooling furnace. "Latham obeyed ambition. The housekeeper obeyed jealousy. The chemist's apprentice obeyed fear. Even poor Willoughby obeyed his obsession for the perfect note. Each followed their chosen frequency to destruction." He placed the brass mould upon the bench, his fingers tracing its engraved surface one final time. "It is well that this, too, be stilled." I stepped forward. "What will you do with it?" "Destroy it," he said simply. "But not here. To shatter it in this place would awaken every sympathetic vibration in the structure. We would hear the city hum for a week." "Then where?" He smiled faintly. "In the river, where London keeps her secrets." Together we carried the mould from the foundry. The dawn was creeping pale across the mist, turning the Thames into a sheet of dull pewter. Holmes stood at the edge of the embankment,
the faint whistle of wind echoing through the iron railings like the ghost of a melody. He lifted the mould high. "Let silence reclaim its maker," he said. Then, with a motion both solemn and final, he cast it into the river. It struck the water with a low, resonant gong, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the stones beneath our feet. The ripples spread outward, widening until they merged with the slow, ceaseless current. Neither of us spoke. The city was waking now, distant carts rumbling, a whistle from afar off. Barge. But in that moment, each sound seemed newly precious, alive, human. Holmes finally broke the quiet. "You see, Watson, there is no such thing as absolute silence. Even death contains its murmur. What Willoughby sought was not peace, but control. And control," he glanced toward the lightening sky, "is the most transient note of all." I said softly, "You pity him." Holmes's mouth curved. "I pity brilliance turned inward. It consumes itself for want of audience." He drew a deep breath of the river air, crisp and metallic. "Come, my dear fellow. Mrs. Hudson will have prepared coffee by now, and I dare say you have another case to immortalize." As we turned from the embankment, a faint sound rose behind us, barely perceptible, like a chord resolving itself at the edge of hearing. Whether it came from the river or from memory, I could not tell. Holmes paused, listening one last time. "The final echo," he said quietly. "The city forgives nothing, but it remembers everything." And then, as the first rays of morning touched the fog, that whispering tone faded at last, leaving only the rhythm of footsteps, 2 men walking home, and the steady heartbeat of London resuming its song.